Guten Tag, wie geht's Ihnen? Super toll hier zu sein. By the way, this concludes the German part of my presentation. I'll now switch to English if you don't mind. When I was asked to speak to the theme of change the world with creativity, I thought about what are the criteria that define world-changing creativity. And for me, one important criteria is you have to at least insult one person, or preferably a group of people, with the work that you do. If you don't offend anyone, you're not changing the world with creativity. Somehow, somewhere, somebody has to throw you an insult. Well, thank you ADC Germany for announcing me like the Dr. Frankenstein of meatballs. It's a semi-sweet insult, so it's not too bad. But they could have easily said Dr. Einstein of meatballs. That would have been better, but Dr. Frankenstein of meatballs made me at least think about the work that I've done over the years and how, in any case, if something big happened, there was some kind of insult. Somebody was angry, somebody was offended, somebody ridiculed me, and I want to take you through some of those insults.
This summer, two sports united in a way never seen before. Introducing a new chapter in sports broadcasting history. Golf meets soccer at the National Foot Golf Championship. Join nation's top 20 soccer players in the first annual tournament. Strategy, power, and talent are tested in the ultimate sport challenge of the year. The National Foot Golf Championship. An experience you will never forget.
So in 2008, I came up with the idea of foot golf. And it was based on a little game that my brother played when he was at Tottenham Hotspur in the Premier League. And he did, after each practice, they played a little game where they tried to kick the ball in as little kicks as possible from the practice pitch into the dressing room door. And I went like, that's golf. So created a sport. And it's ridiculous. Wherever you go in the world, you can play foot golf. Here in Hamburg, there's football clubs. And it's incredible how much enthusiasm was created around this. At the same time, you saw one of the players cheer when he put the ball in the hole. Golf players don't like that. So Sven Geis on Reddit had a large rant about how he hated foot golf players because they cheered too loud. Golf courses were very happy with foot golf players because they brought in extra cash. But golfers really, really hated foot golf. So you can't come up with an idea and not offend anyone. And then in 2016, I did this project.
Well, a new painting in the style of Rembrandt has been unveiled in Amsterdam, painted nearly 4 centuries after the famous Dutch artist's death. It took over 2 years, and it does look remarkably like the real thing.
The next Rembrandt brings back to life one of the greatest masters. Only this time, data is the painter and technology the brush. Together with experts from various fields, over 160,000 fragments from all of Rembrandt's 346 paintings were analyzed, using 3D scans and digital files, upscaled by a deep learning algorithm. Facial recognition software was designed to understand Rembrandt's style and generate new facial features, which were assembled based on his use of geometric proportions. Finally, using a height map to mimic Rembrandt's brushstrokes, the painting was brought to life through an advanced 3D printer that printed 13 layers of paint-based ink. And so, 347 years after his death, a new Rembrandt painting made from zeros and ones emerged, unveiled and exhibited in Amsterdam. Experts, the press, and the general public were invited to join the conversation about where data and technology can take us. A conversation that went global.
Nieuwe schilderij van Rembrandt.
Impressive just from a data standpoint.
Numérique, il a pris forme à Amsterdam.
Rembrandt makes a return.
A number of organizations took a seemingly impossible task.
148 billion pixels.
It looks precisely like a Rembrandt portrait.
The world was buzzing with all the leading news channels and blogs reporting about the fading boundaries between technology and humanity. Almost 100 million people joined the conversation about ING's innovation defying imagination. The next Rembrandt. What's next?
So when we did this project, we knew that the tech world would love it, the art world would have doubts, and we used that in our PR strategy. So we played out these two audiences against each other. But there was one person, and it was an 80-year-old Rembrandt expert who has dedicated his life to Rembrandt, the master. It's a Dutch guy called Ernst van der Wetering. He was 80 years when this project launched. And he was in my office, and he had a magnifying glass, and he was scrutinizing every square millimeter of the painting. And he looked at it, and he studied it, and then he said, Rembrandt prostitution. It's not as bad as being called the Antichrist of 17th century art, because that's also what I've heard, but still, not great. At the same time, I can understand if you've dedicated your life to studying Rembrandt, and there's an advertising agency that comes up and says, hey, we made a new one, that you're critical, so no worries. Sticking with the theme of prostitution, taking a bit more of a serious note, we did a project in 2017, which was done for an NGO called Free a Girl. Free a Girl is an NGO that goes to India, goes to brothels, breaks down doors, takes out the underage kids that are forced to prostitute themselves in these brothels, and then takes them out to safety. The problem is that that doesn't stop the cycle of impunity that surrounds this issue in India, because while there are 1.2 million underage kids in this situation, only 52 convictions a year on average make it in the legal system in India. So something needed to change. And they asked us, could you do an ad? And I said, well, an ad's not going to cut it. And I love making things physical, so I made it physical.
যখন আমার 9 বছর তখন আমাকে সোনাগাছিতে বিক্রি করে দিয়েছিল। আর আমার উপরে খুব অত্যাচারও করেছিল। যারা আমার সাথে এমনি করেছে তারা স্বাধীনভাবে থাকছে আর আমি স্বাধীনভাবে থাকতে পারছি না ওদের জন্য।
We've set up a law school that educates victims of child prostitution to become the most motivated lawyers and prosecutors India has to offer, so they can bring the people responsible for these crimes to justice. We are collaborating with one of the best law universities in India. The girls follow a 5-year education to become a lawyer or public prosecutor. 19 brave girls started their law education despite the threats made to their lives, and India watched. The conversation that started lifted the lid on the taboo subject of child prostitution and took India by storm. The world followed soon. The School for Justice is a radical yet tangible solution to a deeply rooted problem. The school itself is the campaign, and the opening, the start. It triggered an immediate response and participation. It is changing India's mindset when it comes to child prostitution and the impunity that surrounds it, and is already changing the lives of young girls.
আমি এই পাচারের বিরুদ্ধে লড়তে চাই।
আমি বিচার চাই।
But it is only a true success when the first criminals and rapists will be put behind bars by the students. And believe us, they are passionate to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great that after the School for Justice opened in India, we had 3 more schools open in Bangladesh and Brazil. So it's a great testament of doing something that changes something radically. The only thing, and as it mentioned in the film as well, there were a lot of problems with people surrounding the girls, trying to prevent them from going into school, even from their families, because sometimes even the families are involved in keeping this prostitution ring going. So not only the girls got threats, we also, production company, advertising agency, received threats to our lives because we did this, which also says you're doing something right, but at the same time, of course, it's also the reason why we started this in the first place. So, and then on to the project that I was invited here to come talk about, which is the Mammoth Meatball. And this is a simple 10-step recipe how you can make your own if you want. It's going to take a few years, though. Let's first have a look at the impact that the meatball created.
Sometimes come across a story about meat that is so important, so dare I say, juicy, that we give that story its own meanwhile subsegment, Meatwhile.
If you've ever said you're so hungry you could eat a woolly mammoth, well, you might be in luck.
A startup in Australia has revealed a meatball
of prehistoric proportions.
Yep, it's a meatball made from a woolly mammoth.
I'm begging for you to bring up the meatball.
A company called Vow.
Vow, an Australian cultured meat startup,
used genetic information from an extinct animal.
And they took the DNA sequence from a mammoth muscle protein and filled in the gaps with cells from an elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative.
When replicated, it grew to 20 billion cells, resulting in 14 ounces of meat.
It's actually starting a pretty important dialogue.
So why choose the mammoth, I guess?
Because mammoths are a symbol of diversity loss and climate change.
We need to find a more humane and sustainable way to grow meat.
We can't continue to eat the way that we have, and we have to find alternatives.
We actually made a mammoth meatball.
¿Qué tal una albóndiga de mamut لانو؟
أردنا أن نجعل الناس متحمسين.
Arbal van mammoetvlees.
A woolly mammoth taste.
You like to eat a woolly mammoth?
This meatball is made out of extinct mammoth meat.
Rarely grown cultured meat from the cells of a woolly mammoth.
Would you eat a woolly mammoth meat?
Placed it in myoblast stem cells from a sheep.
Would you eat a meatball made from mammoth?
20 billion cells.
It's definitely a bit unique.
Instead of killing an animal.
Instead,
more sustainable.
You guys try it.
From the cells
historic meat. Who would eat the meatball?
DNA.
They recreated
Mammoth meatball, so it would be amiss of us to make it.
Who's craving a prehistoric meal?
Future of modern food.
They achieved what they wanted to.
They did.
We're talking about their mammoth meatball.
Yes.
So when we started this project, the first thing that we needed to do was we needed to look for a big relevant difference. And I think everyone knows how bad eating meat is for our planet. If you think about CO2 emissions, if you think about animal welfare, animal cruelty, we need to stop slaughtering 80 billion animals a year. And even though we all know this, we still keep eating more meat. Since 1960, meat consumption has doubled, and it's not stopping. We need a second planet to be able to provide everyone with the meat that they want. So we need to come up with an alternative that's better than plant-based, because plant-based is not cutting it. We need an alternative that's actually better and cheaper than the meat that we have now, and cultured meat can be that solution. And so it wasn't really known. It was still very much in labs. And I thought, can I make an expression that actually elevates this technology, makes people aware of what this solution could provide, and do it with in a way that it just hits people between the eyes. So I wanted to do something with cultured meat. And then I started looking into what could be the boldest expression. Because if I would have made chicken nuggets, we wouldn't be sitting here. It needed to be something special. So I started out with dodo nuggets, and then a T-Rex burger. And that was all very hard because there was not enough genetic information to get to those kind of products. So then we ended up on the Mammoth. And the Mammoth had a lot of, actually just stuff that you can find online, genetic information that we could work with. So we kind of had our animal then. But then we also needed a technology partner. And it was interesting because in the Netherlands, there are two very famous leading cultured meat companies, Mosa Meat and Meatable. Mosa Meat was the company that made the first cultured meat hamburger 13 years ago. It cost $250,000 for one hamburger. But Mosa Meat and Meatable, they're trying to look to replicate the existing meat. So chicken, pork, beef. Why? Because Vow, the company from Australia that I did this with, they said, why not go for a zebra steak or a Galapagos turtle burger? If we don't have to kill the animal, if we just have to take a cell and grow it, then maybe there are much more interesting taste profiles out there. So they were ready to play ball, and I worked with them to get to this outcome. And that goes for any big creative idea. Prepare for at least 10 no's along the way. I've worked a long time with Oxford University to get this off the ground, and they said, well, you have to start digging, because it was still talking about dodos at the time. You have to start digging under the airport in Mauritius, because there might be some dodo bones left there. And I was going like, okay, well, maybe that's not going to happen. Can't really break down the Mauritian airport for this project. But you have to understand that there's going to be stuff thrown in your way. And then you have to have the naivety that I had from a technology perspective, go like, no, we're going to do it. And people go like, no, you can't, because it doesn't work like this, because we've done it a long time, over and over, it never works. And I just said, well, we're going to do it, so find a way. And that is the relentlessness that you need, because there are going to be people that are going to come to you and say, nope, can't be done, nope, doesn't work. And also, this is not a project that you can do by yourself. You need a lot of partners, and here's just a selection of the many, many companies that contributed to this campaign. And these are all examples and steps that are part of any creative project. So let's go a bit deeper on the actual creation of the Mammoth Meatball. Because you have to start with a gene. What is the best gene to make the Mammoth Meatball the best tasting Mammoth Meatball that could be? And we chose the myoglobin gene. It's basically the red that you see when you cook a steak. That's myoglobin, and we thought, okay, that's the right gene. Now we need to get to the DNA sequence. So together with the University of Queensland, there was a professor there, a bioengineer, that said, okay, we can do this. What we need to do is, we've got the DNA sequence, myoglobin, but there are some gaps. So what do we do? Okay, let's look at what is the closest living relative to the mammoth at the moment, and it's the African elephant. So we took parts of the DNA of the African elephant and inserted it into the DNA of the mammoth and completed the DNA sequence that way. So then we had a full genome. And then we needed to grow them. So we inserted the genome into a carrier cell and started growing them, feeding it, growing it. And what we never told anyone is that it started growing really fast. So we're going like, whoops, what did we create here? But in the end, we also needed it to grow fast because we needed 20 billion of them to actually get to the size of mammoth ball that I needed. Because I said to the team as well, I need a big meatball. I can't come to the world with a little meatball and say this is a mammoth meatball. It needs to be a big, meaty meatball. So then we grew 20 billion of them, created a whole specific process because this was done outside of the the general vow work process. So we actually created the 20 billion of them, and we launched it in Amsterdam in 2023. And I think what's happened since, what's interesting is, what we tried to do with this project was to get people to understand the importance of cultured meat as an alternative to our regular meat industry. But also, governments are not going to change regulatory approval if there's no pressure from us. So if we're not asking for it, if we're not telling them, we want this, look into this, there's not going to be any change. So in the 10 years prior to the Mammoth Meatball launch, there was only one country in the world where you could actually eat and buy cultured meat, which was Singapore. But in the year after the Mammoth Meatball launch, 7 countries have opened up for cultured meat, and you can actually buy and taste and sell cultured meat in those countries, amongst which a few big meat-eating markets like Australia and the US. So we're on our way, but there are still some very conservative countries like Italy, for instance, who want to ban this because they feel it's going against how food should be made. And it's interesting because I started with insults. I need to end with one, a good one. So it was more than an insult. It was actually the creationists, so the people that don't believe in evolution. They did a whole campaign against the Mammoth Meatball. And it was a whole campaign about how this is bad, you shouldn't do this, we should all fight against this. So I think that's the main gist of the story that I'm trying to tell here is, if you want to do something that has an impact and that changes things, then there are going to be people that are going to be reluctant to the change. They're going to be reluctant to maybe their own existence being under threat, because we also got some serious suggestions from the meat industry as well. So it's all about the status quo and trying to break that. So my shout out to you is, please insult someone, because then you know you have something that changes the world with creativity. Thank you.